Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to talk about air brake control systems. So before we can talk about the air brake control systems, little history on braking for the equipment out here. Initially, for many years, these cars have always had some kind of brake system. Most of the time it was simply just a piece of wood with a short strip of leather attached to the wood, and then that would press up against the wheel. The leather was added to give a little more friction versus just the piece of wood, and that block was pulled by a rope, which was wrapped around a spool underneath the car, and that spool was tied to a crank arm in the cab. So you would just kind of roll, turn the crank, and that would roll up the rope onto the spool, which would eventually pull the rope tight, pull on the wooden block with the leather, and that would push against the wheel, slow the car down. It got the job done. Many times there was a small gear sprocket welded to the crankshaft that you would crank by hand, and there was a nail that you could push over, a pivoting nail that you could push against into the gears, kind of wedge it into the gear, and that would make your parking brake. So you would crank on the brake until it got tight on the shoe, and then you would push the little nail into the sprocket, and that would keep it there once you let your hand off the crank. It's about as basic as you could get, totally functional. When I first started coming out here in the mid-90s, I always wanted to have an air brake system. So at the time, I was working in industry where we used a lot of air cylinders, and so I grabbed an air cylinder off of some used equipment, and I said, hey, let's try to put this air cylinder on. It was actually the work car, the line car, 877, was the first one to get air brakes, and that was probably, I don't know, maybe 1998 or 7, somewhere in that neighborhood. So the cylinder was added, so let's go over and have a look. I'm presently out here in the barn, kind of move some things out so we can talk about this. So the work car here, here it is. This is the original first air brake system that was put on. So here we have a wooden block that goes up against the wheel, and there's just one wooden block on this car. That's all it has for brakes, and it is mounted on a hinge. If you can see that, there's a hinge. This one's getting pretty wore down. This block has been on here for a long time. So basically this little cylinder right here, it's a double-ended cylinder. It's got a garage door spring return on it, which really it doesn't need. But at the time I thought it needed that. I just left it on there. So yeah, this little cylinder, it's like I think that's about a 3 or 3.5 inch bore air cylinder, and it just pushes on this wooden block up against the wheel, and that's how we got our brakes. Now, as far as controlling that, I'll show you the control valve here in a minute. But first, in order to get the air, we used to use this air tank right here. And what we would do is charge this air tank up before we'd go out for a ride. So I have this little compressor right here. This is the air compressor, only air compressor that we had at the time when we first got air brakes. And so what we would do is we'd take this compressor You clamp the ground clamp to the rail right there, and then this stinger right here. So you take this stinger and you hook it up to the overhead. All right, and voila, you've got compressed air. So you take that and charge up this air tank. You can see it's got a quick connect fitting on it, so we just plug the air compressor in, and then plug in the line that goes to the car, which I have right here. So this little guy, so standard quick connect fitting. So that's what we did for a long time. Well, then later on came about these little compressors at some of the local hardware stores. They're little Chinesium, air compressors, like $100, So I said, well, hey, for $100, I don't have to drag around this heavy old compressor. We'd have unlimited air, because sometimes you ride for a few hours and this tank would start to get low, and you'd have to either take the compressor with you or come back to the barn, get some more air. So eventually bought this little guy, and I actually just have one of these, and I move it from the line car to the box motor and to the Bernie. So depending on what I'm riding, I can just easily, it's just got a little 110 plug on it here, and then the quick connect. So I only need to buy one air compressor. Usually I'm only operating any one of those pieces of equipment at a time. So I just move it around. It's real convenient. It's got a little handle. Thing doesn't weigh hardly anything. That's been working real well for us. The steeple cab does have its own air compressor that's built in, and it just stays on all the time. I mounted it in there permanently because that is the heaviest used car out here. So it has its compressor all the time. So that takes care of the air supply, and you see the brake cylinder there. So let's talk about controlling that air. So I went through a couple different iterations of valves to control that cylinder. Obviously we wanted, you don't want the brake just on or off. You want it to be kind of proportional. Sometimes you want to decelerate slowly. You don't want to just turn the brake on and it throws you out the window. So the very first valve, I have the two first valves that I ever made for regulating proportionally the pressure that goes to the cylinder. So the compressor runs at about 100 psi, and the brake cylinder, obviously we want it 0 to 100 psi. So the first one that I made was this guy here, and this one, so here's the handle, and you can see when I move this handle, it pushes on these these are just little air switches. They're just on-off air switches. And what that would do then, you could, push this way. It would pump some air into the cylinder, and it would do so via these tiny little hoses. All right, so that was kind of like a flow control. So the air would slowly build into the cylinder, and I had a gauge on in the cab that I could watch. So I'd start applying the brake, it would build air slowly, the piston would come out, push the shoe, and brake would apply. And then whenever I got to, okay, we got enough brake, you just let it go. It just kind of, it centers right there in the middle. And what that would do was it would basically bottle the air in the cylinder and hold the brake at that level until I moved this handle the other way. And when I moved this handle the other way, this switch would activate, and that would exhaust air from the cylinder and let the spring pull the cylinder back. So this was the very first valve that we had for controlling air brake, and it worked perfectly, did exactly what we needed to do, but it's not exactly very prototypical. So then I made this one. So this one has a regulator. This is just a simple little air pressure regulator, and in fact it's just like this one, and it had a this just got a little screw on it, and the more you screw it in, the more air pressure you get out. Except what I did is I took this part out and I replaced it with a pin, which you can see right here, and then this handle operates an eccentric wheel. So I machined this wheel into an eccentric. It is not round. You can kind of see here. Sorry, it's hard to hold this and operate this at the same time, but so you can see the more I turn this, the more it pushes that little pin in. So yeah, this little guy worked really well, and we had this thing for a long time. Then I ended up coming across a little bit different kind of valve, which I'll show you here in a second. So the next kind of valve that we used was this, and this is also just a proportional valve. The more you move the handle, it just takes air comes in here, goes out here. So the more you move the handle, the more pressure you get coming out of the output. So we went to these for a little bit in the line car, and of course at that time, we'd had good success with the brake in the line car. So as time went on, I was slowly converting all the equipment over to air brakes, and I believe this box motor was the next one that got air brakes. So this is the valve, and I still use this valve. Nothing wrong with these valves at all. Actually, they work just fine. So they're just simply a regulator, and the more you turn the handle, the more pressure you get out the output hose. So we'll take a second to look at the trucks on the box motor, just so you can see how that one works as far as the brake cylinder goes. So this one has 2 brake shoes. You can see these wood blocks. These are the pivot points up at the top, and then this is the cylinder down. It's kind of buried in here. But basically this cylinder expands, whenever air pressure is applied to it. The piston comes out, the cylinder pushes. You can kind of see how it moves. So it moves on a slide. All right, so the back side of the cylinder pushes that shoe, the front side of the cylinder pushes that shoe, and it presses them up against the wheels, and you get stopping power. All right, so we used that one for quite some time, and then as time went on, I came across a different kind of valve. This is the one that I'll show you that's used in the steeple cab. So let's see, is this the side with the brake shoe? Yep. So here's the steeple cab braking system. So you can see the cylinder up in there. There again, there's a wood block. I know it's really hard to see in here, but there's a wood block right there. There's another one right there. And just like on the box motor, as the cylinder has air put in it, then it pushes harder on the wooden blocks, press up against the wheel, and gives you more brake effort. All right, so here is the valve that is used, and I've got several of these, so I'm going to use these more frequently as time goes on. This valve is again, it's just a proportional pressure valve. So the more you move the handle, so here's our handle, it moves like this, and you can see on our gauge, so the red is the brake cylinder pressure, and as I move this handle, you can see the pressure is increasing. The white needle is the main reservoir pressure. So air pressure, comes in here from the compressor, and this just goes out to the cylinder. It's got a little T in the line, go up here to feed our gauge, so we can see what the brakes are doing. These valves came out of some maintenance away machinery, and I've got several of these. Company that I work for was scrapping some of that machinery for the company, and I was able to liberate these valves before they were cut up, and I really like the feel of them. They got this nice big handle on here, and they look pretty prototypical. I mean, they are used on track machinery, so I think they go better just with the controls. So that's kind of why I prefer using those over anything else. So eventually I'm going to put one of those in. Let's see, right now only the line car, I think, is the only other car that has this valve. So eventually I'm going to put one of these in the box motor, and I don't know that the curbside will ever get one, because I just don't run that car enough. The Bernie has this style, the kind, what I would call the intermediate style of brake valve. That's what the Bernie has in it, and I'm going to leave that style of brake valve in the Bernie because it just seems to fit that control cab layout better than this style would here. So yeah, that's really all there is to the air brakes. I know a lot of you have been asking about air brake controls, and they're so simple. Not a whole lot you can say about them. There's nothing fancy about this. Now, none of the cars have any kind of braking on them at all. I am planning on adding some air brake cylinders to this gondola car and probably the dump cars as well, just because coming down the hill loaded, I could use just a little bit more brake effort. So eventually probably going to do that. Of course, I'll make a video on that so you can see how that goes. So there are still two pieces of equipment with what I would call a manual brake, and that would be the open car here. This one, this car is so small, it really didn't make sense for me to put, a compressor and a valve and all that stuff on it. And the car is just so light, it really doesn't need it. But you can see down here, here's the brake shoe, right? You can see it right there, this little wooden block. And there's a little piece right there, you can see. So that's what pushes on the block, and that little piece is just operated by this handle right here. So this thing, you just move it whenever you want to slow down, you just pull it back, kind of like Indiana Jones when they're riding those little carts, right? And these short rounds pulling on the stick until it breaks off. So also the track speeder uses that same kind of brake, which I'll show you. Since this car is all open, you can see how it works. So here we have the handle right here, and when I move the handle, it just pushes the wooden block up against the wheel. And you know, this kind of brake works fine for a real small piece of equipment. You know, if you're looking for just a basic brake, here you go. So yeah, that's about everything I have to say about the air brake. You know, if you guys have any questions, be sure to put them in the comments below. I'll get back to you as I can. And yeah, thanks again everybody for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share some videos with your friends. I appreciate all your views, and we'll see you next time.